Your brain is made up of dendrites, axons, synapses, and it's 128 billion individual neurons. It's a network. We've been told that the brain has a left side, right side, has 3 layers. It was evolved to allow us to be emotional and rational. I'm reading 7.5 Lessons About the Brain by Lisa Feldman Barrett, author of How Emotions Are Made. And she starts by kind of dispelling a simple view of the brain. And what it is a complex, highly adapted organ. And the metaphor she uses is the airline industry and airports as hubs. And generacy is flying a different airline from a same 2 airports, between 2 airports. So the analogy is kind of the complexity of the system in that there are many combinations. There is plasticity, where neurons are able to adapt to other tasks. So when a kid is born with cataracts, their corresponding brain area can adapt to new uses when it is not being used to see. So the 7.5 lessons are as such. The first lesson is the half lesson. Your brain is not for thinking. So we think of us as more evolved than animals, whereas we've just adapted to unique circumstances that social patterns have given us. We talked about the brain not being 3 parts, but rather 1 part, where a very complex interaction among the various parts of the brain. And then the network analogy, where you can get from A to B on various different airlines, through different hubs, through different airports, and kind of how the brain sets up to take on a task. It has many ways that neurons can fire. And then the other third lesson is little brains wire themselves to their world. Talks a little bit about how when you're born, your brain is not so much a product of nurture versus nature, but is rather growing up in an environment of its caretakers. And then the 4th lesson is your brain predicts almost everything you do, and this talks a little bit about personal agency and whether you have free will. Our brains are designed to make us survive, allow us to survive. And so an example is an African soldier had PTSD. He was in the forest. He thought a shepherd was a guerrilla fighter. And clearly the shepherd was not carrying an AK-47, but his brain was so pre-learned or prejudicial, I guess you could even say, that he thought that non-harmful shepherd was a threat because of his past experiences and his imprinted brain that taught him essentially that situation where all his human qualities, his heart rate, his internal temperature, everything that his brain had previously experienced as threatening, caused his visualization to be actually not what it is. So this book talks a lot about how the inner and the outer sometimes don't match, and this is delusion, where people believe certain things that their brain has told them. Chapter 5 is Your Brain Secretly Works with Other Brains. This talks about the nervous system, how it's interdependent on other humans and their energy, their physical energy. Your heart rate is affected by someone who's near to you. Long-term relationships, marriage, and a lack of a solitary confinement are shown to increase longevity. Chapter 6 talks about the brain makes more than one kind of mind. It talks about acculturation and how you have to rewire your brain when you're in a different culture. Human nature is not universal. Common sense is not common. And Western culture has this divide between thinking and feeling, whereas in Bali it's the same. When they're afraid, they sleep, is an example they give. And the differences between people and their personalities and their minds and their brains, everyone is a variation of the human being, and it's good for survival because variation will increase the likelihood we survive a catastrophe. It talks about the Myers-Briggs indicator as essentially bullshit. I think Persona, the documentary on HBO Max, talked a little bit about that. I thought it was a shitty documentary. But basically, all these simple boxes and our way of making sense of complex things in the world are just the product of that, essentially, is trying to make things simple that are not. Lesson 7, Our Brains Can Create Reality, talks about social reality as uniquely human through 5 C's: creativity, communication, copying, cooperation, and compression. Creativity to, create borders, abstraction, copying, using laws, norms from other examples to cooperate, and compression is the ability to take all that and make it into abstract concepts. So there's this picture of the front of the brain where there's larger neurons, more connections represent the most compressed summaries, and then the back of the brain, smaller neurons, fewer connections representing sensory details. So you take your train from creativity through cooperation to abstraction, and it basically creating a reality from senses, from sense data, I guess is what she calls it.